All right, so yeah, I don't know. We've had some pretty craptacular weeks lately, so we took last week off, and last thing we did was Amos and Andy 2 weeks ago. So I thought this week just to ease back in, because I don't think either of us are usually in podcasting mood. I know I'm definitely not. But let's get this fucking train back on the road. Might as well, right? Why not?
Yeah, life goes on.
And yeah, and again, this is just my excuse to come over here every week. It's like, if I didn't, not that I wouldn't come over, but it's so easy just to skip. It's like, whatever. And the next thing you know, it's been a month, Having this little weekly reason to come to the north side does help because, like I was saying, it's not always a fun walk. Today was a wind nightmare. So, but just to take it kind of easy, I was like, what's like the comfort food of this little journey so far? And I would say it's got to be Jack Benny. Like Jack Benny was the show that to me is like the best show. I'm like, man, that's a really good show. Like I could see someday sitting down and going out of my way to watch Jack Benny.
I thought the I Love Lucy show, not the pilot, the other one, was good.
It was okay. Again, it's like I feel like
But
that's
very
something
similar.
Something if I catch it here and there, it'd be fine. But personally, I was into Jack Benny. So
Okay.
But just out of curiosity, this all kind of ties in though inadvertently. It's neat how all this TV shit ties together. I just did a search for, I don't know, top episodes of Jack Benny. Let's see what people have to say. And I found this article by the Onion AV Club that they do, like they write about TV and movies, that kind of ties in with the Amos and Andy thing, where it was an article they wrote for Black History Month, and it was like 5 example episodes of how Rochester was a good character, especially for back then. And they brought up Amos and Andy in this article and like how, just tough it was to get anything on TV that involved black guys, black people at all, and how Amos and Andy started as white guys and then became black actors, but even that was all this controversy. But yeah, so they brought up that Rochester in Jack Benny, the actor's name is Eddie Anderson, and he was already kind of famous because he was in 2 Best Picture award-winning movies back to back. He was in You Can't Take It With You and Gone with the Wind in 1938 and 1939. So it looks good on his resume that he was in these 2 Academy Award-winning movies, but in both movies he was just the house help or whatever, he was just a minor kind of generic character. Where they said compared to that, like that seems like the accolade, but the real accolade was him being Rochester on Jack Benny, because Rochester was still that kind of character. He was still like the valet for Mr. Benny, but the way the show played out, it's like Rochester basically always got one over on Jack Benny.
Yeah. Usually stole the show.
Yeah, and then as the show went on, they had these examples of how the 2 of them really were like on-screen friends, basically. Like Jack Benny overhears in one episode that Rochester is gonna go fishing, but the way he words it sounds like he's gonna quit, and Jack Benny's just freaking out because he can't run his life without this guy, and is just going so far out of his way now to give him a raise and stuff, and Rochester just lets it all play out. Stuff like that. That was like that level of equality between characters was not common at all back then. But more importantly was the real life thing where they would tour around and do kind of like a live Jack Benny tour thing. And Jack Benny refused to play any segregated theater because there were still a bunch of them. And he's just like, fuck you guys. We're just not showing up then. And he was like the only one who did that. So that's just kind of a nice counterpoint. I just wanted to watch Jack Benny just because I like him. but that ties into what we were talking about last episode. So that's kind of neat. So then also what I thought was kind of neat, they picked 5 episodes from throughout the run that were just good Rochester episodes. So I thought, let's just go in as far as we can go. The very last episode that was on the list, it's called New Year's Eve. It's from season 12, episode 11. So this is up to 1961. So this is way ahead of all the other stuff that we've been watching. But I just figured we can afford to jump ahead because it's Jack Benny. And this is like, we kind of talked about this at the time with some of these shows of like, we should check back in with them and see how they were different at the end than they were at the start. So this is sooner than I thought we were going to do such a thing. But because it's got the Rochester connection and I just want to watch Jack Benny.
Okay, let's go for it.
Yeah, so we get both things. We get to see how a show evolves after 12 seasons. Like I didn't know it ran that long. That's a lot of seasons. And yeah, it ties in with Amos and Andy and the very slow progress of having black characters on TV.
Lipton tea.
Well,
So yeah, I looked a little closer at that article, and yeah, like what they said was that this episode is a high point for the series, but not comedically, but for sentimental reasons. And I'm like, oh, I picked the wrong one, because yeah, it was not very funny.
no, it wasn't funny at all, actually, and it was very sentimental.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess once in a while you got to do that type of thing. Maybe for the New Year's crowd, like if this was actually aired New Year's, I don't know. Maybe I don't know. But yeah, so started off with literally 10 minutes of just Jack Benny's, I guess like people he performs with, just them backstage, telling kind of lame New Year's jokes, and they sang a whole song, like a whole song. Yeah, I checked. It was like 13 minutes just to get to the point of.
Wow.
Jack Benny can't go to the New Year's party with all his friends from work because he's got a date, and then the date stands him up. But yeah, that should have been 2 minutes, but that was 13 minutes. And there was a song involved, a long song.
2 songs, not just one.
Oh yeah, that's right.
2.
A secondary, smaller song.
And they weren't good.
And then so Jack Benny gets stood up on New Year's. Slightly funny when he goes to. He's like, I'm just going to go get some soup and go home. But he went to the diner where the girl who he was supposed to be going out with was, just so he could give her a hard time about working on New Year's. And then when he finally went back home, his assistant Rochester is about to leave to go to some, it's like almost midnight, but he's like, this is when our parties begin. Oh, by the way, that voice apparently is because when he was a kid, he was a newspaper guy, just like, extra, extra, here's what's going on. He claims that's why his voice is like that.
His voice.
Yeah. So yeah, instead of going out to his party, he's like, you know what, I'll stay here with you, Mr. Benny. And Jack is so overwhelmed with that his friend is staying with him that he opens a bottle of champagne, which he's such a cheapskate that he's never done before. And credits. It's like, yeah, it's pretty fucking bad. So anyway, I guess what's interesting in the scope of this show we've been doing is 1961 is way deeper in than we've been with these other shows. I guess we got up to, I don't know, when...
You watched something that was in the 60s. I can't remember what it was, but...
Yeah. So I guess I'm kind of interested about how if Cisco Kid was the first black and white show in 1950, but that was clearly way ahead of the curve, but here in 1961, Jack Benny's still black and white. Like, I wonder when the transfer happened, when there were no more black and white shows and just everything was color.
You had to get to the point where you had enough people who had color TVs that it made it worth your while.
Yeah.
I know in Canada, when I was a kid, we'd be watching things like Front Page Challenge and that in 1965, 1966, and they were all black and white. So there was still a lot of black and white stuff going on, I guess, but we had a black and white TV, so even if it was in color, how would we have known?
It makes me think of in the modern era, because The Simpsons has been running for like whatever, almost 30 years continuously. So in the last 30 years, animation has changed. You used to literally draw the frames by hand, and then everything switched over to computer. But The Simpsons was the last show to still be animated by hand because it just never got canceled. Like they were just doing it the old way until they just literally couldn't anymore because all of the, they have places in South Korea that finish the animation, like they do the keyframes, but in Korea they do the in-betweens. And finally, the South Korean animation studios were like, we just don't do this anymore. Everything's computers. You have to switch. So it's weird that The Simpsons was the last one because they just never got canceled. So I wonder if there's a case like that with black and white, like some show that just ran forever and just held on way longer. I don't know. I'll have to look into that sometime, I guess, of just what was the last black and white show, if there is such a thing.
Well, by the early 60s, there probably weren't enough people who had color TV that it made it worth their while. And news broadcasts and those sorts of things were still black and white because when President Kennedy got assassinated,
Oh, yeah.
that film footage
Yeah, it's
is
all black and white,
And, okay, moving ahead, the film footage that they have of Martin Luther King's assassination in 1968 is black and white, but the Bobby Kennedy assassination, which is only a couple of months later, is in color.
So I guess then the more pertinent question maybe with the color black and white thing is what in the hell were they doing with Cisco Kid? why was it in color in 1950? There was no need. That's way too soon. That's weird, right?
To see, very few people would have had televisions in those days.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
strange.
It's an odd one.
But I guess I'd kind of gotten it. I'm like scrambling my information here because of Cisco Kid. I just assumed, 1961, Jack Benny. Surely that'll be in color. But it ain't.
Yeah, see you later.
So anyway, yeah, this is sort of a limp week, I guess, of just my big plan of like, let's just have a nice, easy, fun Jack Benny week. Sort of backfired.
Yeah.
Oh well.
I wouldn't recommend that show.
Yeah. Yeah, if that had been the only one we had seen. So anyway, next week I guess we'll just get back to the more normal path I've been going through TV. Well, actually, I think I'll just tell you right now because it might suck, but I do already know what next week's going to be. So do you remember there was the first 100 years, I think it was called? It was like a soap opera.
Oh, yes.
And it was
it British?
It was American, but it was like half super boring, and then the other half was like, we believe your husband died because he was looking into labor practices. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. That one.
But the important thing about the first 100 years is it was quickly canceled and then replaced by the longest running TV show ever, Guiding Light. So Guiding Light is the next thing on my list. So I doubt Guiding Light's going to be good, but we got to check it out just because we saw the first 100 years. So now we got to see what they did to tweak the formula to make it last for 60 straight years or whatever it lasted, because Guiding Light is so insane how long it lasted. I wonder if maybe just to really make it weird, why don't I get one of the really old black and white Guiding Lights, but then let me see if I can find like a modern one. Like from whenever that show got canceled. And let's watch them both.
Okay.
And just do the whole, because I just can't imagine the Guiding Light by itself is going to be interesting.
And do a comparison of...
So maybe a comparison would probably be more interesting than just whatever the weird soap opera from the 50s is probably not that interesting. Because I'm sure it won't be even recognizable. Like it'll be the same name for a show, but I can't imagine that there's any other connection after decades and decades.
No, I would imagine all the original characters would have been long gone.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that'll be next week. Guiding Light.
It was a very disappointing one this week.
Yep. I guess that's. I learned my lesson. I shouldn't look up. I mean, it was kind of a double whammy where it was a well-meaning list because it was just meaning to show Rochester in a positive light, but that doesn't mean it's going to be funny. And then this one, especially being the sentimental New Year's show, double means it's not necessarily going to be funny. like the opposite of irreverent. This is like, let's try to be serious in our comedy show, and that's never good. That never turns out.
They wanted to have some just soft emotionalism. They should have left that music out.
Oh, geez, yeah. There's no excuse for... Yeah, because again, like the weird song, to me feels like a real relic by 1961. That's
that little Irish song he was singing and doing his little ditty dance and...
Yeah, and it just like he literally sang the whole song. It was like 3-minute song, and it's just And yeah, like that feels like more of a 50s variety show thing.
It was the same thing like when we watched that Lucy show, and the song went on and on and on, and we said, if they just had a little intro to it, okay. But it just went on and on and on, and this was exactly the same.
Yeah, and it's funny because that was the Lucy pilot. Like they learned from the pilot not to do that, where it feels like Jack Benny by season 12 forgot to not do that.
or they were so hard up for a filler.
Yeah.
To fill that. Ugh, it was awful.
Yeah, I mean season 12, I can't imagine how you could care. Like even bringing up The Simpsons again. Season 12, it's not good anymore. Like, that'd be a separate side thing to search out, but, like, what show is still good after 12 seasons? Has that ever happened? Probably not. So, which, speaking of, yeah, we'll see how 20 seasons of Guiding Light, how that turned out. We'll do that next week.